right, let me go ahead and start with this program. When I decided, which now in retrospect, I don't know if I was, asleep that night or what, but when I decided to do a free world tour of webinars, I certainly didn't want to do like a whole mismatch of different topics. I wanted to get some consistency in the material. So this is the one I landed on. I had several I considered. One was a very important leadership program, but the more I listened to what PMI was saying and to what Neil Prashar is sort of embracing, the idea of what I call the project economy, and that's the term that they've been using. Their interpretation a little bit different than mine, because to me, when I say the project economy, what that says to me is everything is a project and everyone is a project manager, because the projects that we do support the success of the organization we work for. So when I thought about the idea of strategic linkage and how, as a working person, now I stepped out of the quote working world in about 1984, the year we implemented the PMP, and have been on the road as a consultant and a trainer ever since. But I remember back when I was in the working world, one of the things I noticed a lot is that I couldn't really feel like I understood where the project I was working on fit in the overall organization. What was it contributing to the success of the organization? And sometimes I'd find I was just doing a project because I was doing a project, and I never did really see where it contributed anything to the objectives of the organization. So I thought there's probably a lot of people suffer with this, and so I thought, well, let's see if we can talk about how we can establish and maintain a strategic linkage with the projects that we are doing down at the quote working level. So that's why I selected this topic. There was a book written in about 1981 or 82 by a friend of mine, Paul Dinsmore, he's also one of the few PMI fellows. He works out of Rio de Janeiro, but he's a Houston guy, and we've become good friends. Well, in the time of the 81, 82 time frame, he wrote a book called Managing Organizations by Project. And so I went back and looked at that, and I'll be darned if he nailed this thing in the 80s, early in the 80s, where he really made the point that for organizations to be successful, they've got to run effective and efficient projects that are providing results that add to the value of the company. Well, sadly, he was way too early in his process. Way before his time. Nobody really embraced that idea, and now it's come around the horn again to where we're saying, yeah, that was really important. We should have been thinking more seriously about that for the last 30 or 40 years. So we want to look at it from that standpoint. So that's what I'm trying to talk about today, to be sure we know how important it is. And if you don't have it, you need to get it. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on. I do want to point out that, can you advance the slide, Neil? For some reason, I'm not getting slide action here.
No, I can't do that for you, Lee. You're controlling the presentation.
That's what I thought. Well, let's see. What can I do? Let me end this and go back and see if we can start over. All right, let's see what we got. There we go. Now, can you see the slides, I assume?
Yep, looks good. Looks good.
Okay. So the thing I want to point out here is because sometimes the linkage with the strategy is sometimes difficult because of the way projects are executed. There's not good time points to reassess the linkage to see what the value add is. And that's gotten worse now because the environment has changed. I started doing project management in about 1966, probably before some of you, maybe most of you, were even born. And so when we did it back in those days, everything was predictive. I mean, it was pretty straightforward in the way that we did projects. And when we had a project, we got a team assigned to us and they were dedicated. That was a really pretty easy world compared to what we have now. Well, as we've evolved through time, because of the strategic implications that project completion has, the emphasis has been on a little bit more on speed of getting things to the marketplace, if you will. And so because of the advent of IT, the importance of IT, if we look at project management from let's talk a training perspective, 70% of the training money that we see come through the process is IT dollars. They're dollars that the IT organization is investing to do their job more efficiently and more effectively. And out of that, of course, grew this concept of Agile. Agile is the silver bullet of project management. At least that's what they say. This came into being about 2001 when the manifesto was written in a ski resort in Utah, and it's since grown into where it's now a very important part. In fact, I know some of you are waiting anxiously for the 7th edition of the PMBOK to be published in January of next year. In that PMBOK, while today's version has 95% predictive terminology and methodology, when you get into the next one, the 7th edition, it's going to be 50% agile, 50% predictive, agile and hybrid, and 50% predictive. So the environment is changing. So that doesn't change the importance of connecting our projects to the objectives that we hope to accomplish from an organizational perspective. Now, our projects should support either the increase of revenue, the decrease of cost to deliver, those kinds of objectives, the enhancement of image, all of those kinds of objectives are at the very high level. Let's call it the C level, CIO, CFO, COO. Those are the guys and gals at the top of the level making the decisions about what my project's going to do next year. They're picking your projects a year in advance before you ever have any idea. So we've got a very mixed environment. We have the predictive that we try to plan from womb to tomb. We have the agile that we do elaboration in terms of requirements definition. And those methodologies still need to be linked to the contributions that they are making to the overall strategic objectives. So it's a big world out there, and we've got to make sure that we're thinking about what it is we're doing, but more importantly, in many cases, why are we doing it? The why is important. Now, some management people say, you don't need to know why, just do it. Well, we found that the motivation and inspiration of individual contributors is somewhat tied to the feeling they have of importance in terms of their contribution. So knowing where your project is going, knowing what the output of the work that you do becomes important. Now, the problem is nobody really understands strategy that well. There's nothing magical about strategy. Strategy has objectives just like projects have objectives. It's just at a higher level. It's just like a program that's constituted by a plethora of projects. And so the thinking is pretty simple and straightforward. But the point we've got to make sure we understand is that when we talk about the strategy, these are the critical elements, the KPIs, if you want to use that new term, that we need to focus on to be sure that our organization stays in the business, becomes and stays competitive, delivers high quality products and services. And so that's all it is. I mean, it's not that confusing to me, is the strategy. Now, the thing that we need to understand is the strategy that most of us rarely get a chance to participate in the creation of the strategy. That's reserved for high-level thinkers, okay? And that strategy then, of course, spawns all the projects. So for one strategic objective, let's say it's deliver a new product to the marketplace, that's one strategic objective, but it could take multiple projects to enable that to happen. I'm going to use as a reference point a project I managed in the 1989-90 timeframe. It was a save the company project that had to be delivered in 18 months or they were going to go out of business. And it was a $1 billion a year company, so they certainly didn't want to shut the doors. And so they said, what we need to do is deliver a new product. Now, this is blood glucose monitor in-home use for diabetics. Now, I happen to be diabetic, and I happen to use the product that I'm going to tell you about because I know it's good because I did it. And so they hired me as a consultant, by the way, to come in and manage this project to deliver a new product, better, faster, cheaper to the marketplace to regain lost market share and increase market share. Okay. Well, the objective is to deliver a new product. Well, subservient to that objective is I've got to create a new electronic meter. Now, this is blood interaction with a chemistry strip. I've got to have a new meter to read blood glucose levels. I've got to have a new strip to put the blood on. I've got to have carrying cases and accessories. I've got to have qualifications, liquids to test the accuracy of the strips. We ended up with about 7 projects in order to deliver one product. Now, here's the thing. You see, we don't always understand that even though maybe my project was the carrying case. Well, if people go, well, what's the big deal? I mean, a carrying case. Well, it's happened to be part of the project that needs to be complete before we can deliver to the market. So there's a series of projects supporting one strategic objective. And people like to know, where does mine fit? I mean, when you go into somebody and say, hey, man, it's really important that you get going on this thing. We really need your support. It's critical to the organization. And you want to see a showstopper, wait till they turn to you and say, how's it so important? Where does it fit? And if you can't tell them where it's fit, you just lost the inspiration that you would have gained by showing how important it is for them to be linked to the strategy. So we got to simplify the idea of strategy, realizing there's a hierarchy of objectives, and the strategic objectives are at the top of the hierarchy. Seems simple. We do it with work breakdown structures. Why can't we do it with strategy? Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, the thing you can't do is say, well, you know, it's too hard to get the strategic linkage. When I go ask the CEO, CIO, or CFO, they're very reluctant to tell me what the strategy is and what we strategic objectives are. That's their prerogative. They're the big shots, if you will, and so they want to kind of control that. Well, that puts you at a disadvantage. So you don't fall into this trap of, hey, don't bother me about details. Just go do it. That's a philosophy that some organizations practice, and we lose. What do we lose? We lose productivity. People who are excited about their role and how it has an impact on the success of the organization and where it fits, that inspires people. They work harder and faster and better. But if you just stick your head in the sand and say, okay, I'll just do it, then you're not going to benefit from it and being able to have that process supporting the objectives. And the reason we want to have that done is this is without question in my working environment, 90% of senior level management, everything's priority one. Now, we went away to these planning meetings. They go away where there's sun and surf, and they spend a week talking to each other, planning the business for next year. And we get all done, and we got, let's say, a list of 25 business objectives, strategic business objectives that need to be done. And some are products, some are services, some are quality and considerations. We've got a lot of different things going on, and each one of those people responsible for those strategic objectives feel that theirs are priority one. So when you start a project, here's what you must do if you're going to be effective in executing the linkage and therefore delivering the project, is that when you get that charter document, that famous charter document that we talk about at PMI all the time, and you look at it and there's like 2 paragraphs of description and some other miscellaneous information, the first question you have to ask, and this column's not on there, I suggest they put it on there for a long time, but the first question you have to ask is, what strategic objective does this project support? pretty simple question. Where does it fit? Well, if everything's priority one, you lose the advantage of emphasis. If I know where my project fits from a prioritization standpoint, what else do I know? Well, you know how much leverage you might have. You know how much impact you might have on getting resources, because we're working in a matrix. I don't own the resource, not like the old days at GE. I don't own the resource. I got to go beg, borrow, and steal people to get this thing done. And if I know that my project's number one on the hit parade, I'm going to have a lot more leverage in terms of getting the resources that project needs to be successful. So you don't have 25 projects all priority one. And so the organization lets you down because they will tend to fail to prioritize the cross-sectional grouping of projects. Because of different types of projects, they still have to fall into some priority order. Remember, in a matrix organization, we only have so many resources to go around. And if senior level management are identifying more projects that need to be done than we have resources, then we've got a real problem. So we can either do the top 10 really, really well, or we can do all 25. Okay, whatever. So you got to recognize, the more you know about where your project fits, the more you can impact upward by identifying the impact of issues that are occurring on the project. You can benefit downward by making sure people understand the role that they're playing, the importance of their contribution, and so on. So you can begin to see this has a very critical connection to the idea of getting more for less. If you've got less people than you have, or more projects than you have people, then one of the ways we know you can fix that is just hire more people. I want you to go ahead and suggest that to the boss. Just tell them, I need 10 more subject matter experts to get this work done. You're not going to get that. So if that's not an option, what's the other option? The other option is to get the people you have to be more productive in the time that they have. So this is very critical. This linkage to objectives, to strategic objectives, becomes one of the motivators that get people to move on. This project I managed, we had 18 months to get it done. It usually took 3 years for this kind of a medical diagnostic project. Okay, we had 18 months. That was the market window. Without meeting 18 months, they're going out of business. They're going to shut the doors. And so we got the team together. Everybody knew the strategic objective they were supporting. There were other things going on, but everybody knew that we had to get this thing done. And so we did that. In fact, I had a team of 205 people who averaged, listen up, averaged 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for 18 months to get that done. And they were happy to do it. We didn't pay them overtime. These were salaried people. They were happy to do it. They were excited to be contributing to the strategic objectives of the organization. And they admitted afterwards that it was one of the most enjoyable experiences of their life, and they'd do it again in a heartbeat. Okay, so we delivered the product. It took the marketplace by storm. Market share came back in bucket full. And 3 years later, after this project was introduced, and it's still the one on the market today, it's called AccuCheck. It's still out there. 3 years after we introduced that product, this $1 billion a year German-owned company was acquired by Roche Labs for $11 billion. So the work that those 205 people did in connecting to the strategic linkage resulted in an eventual $11 billion acquisition. So that's what we want to make sure we understand. How it's kind of asking you how important is the work you're doing. And if you go, well, I don't know, then you better find out how important is the work that you're doing, because you need to know where you fit. Okay. And what we're trying to do with this idea is create a linkage, not only to the critical objectives, but a linkage up and down, vertically and horizontally within the organization, a linkage of all the projects. So all the projects are linked. And when one project has a difficulty or a challenge, we can immediately begin to anticipate the impact it may have on other projects. So this idea of linkage is a very important one. Every project will fit somewhere in the linkage, and so we need to know what those effects are. Now, the way we do that, and I learned this from my government contracts that I worked on, the way we do this is we use a thing, it's a very innovative concept, it's only been around since the 50s, called a work breakdown structure. Now, if you guys aren't working with work breakdown structures, then I got to know what world you're dealing in. This was the preeminent tool of project management. And for those of you who are thinking, what does that BS stand for? It stands for breakdown structure. We take the work at the highest level, we hierarchically decompose it to the lowest level. So there's a hierarchical integration, vertically integrated. All the little pieces become bigger, and finally you got a product. We do that hierarchically for every project. That becomes the skeleton we hang everything on. Once we've got work defined down to that, what PMI calls work package level, activity level is a more common term in some areas, but down to that work package level, then we can begin to identify skill set requirements and assign resources. We can identify costs based on those resources. We can do risk assessment based on that particular piece of work. And we can go through the spectrum of things that we should do up front in the planning phase to identify what the challenges are, and then be able to say, and oh, by the way, this project happens to be linked to the strategic objective 101, which is going to determine the success or failure of this organization. And now we can have a communication. Now we can identify how much support we get, executive sponsor support. You have to have a champion. There's got to be someone pulling for you. That's what these executive level strategic objective thinkers do. Okay, so that we get that. Now we've been able to do vertical hierarchy segmentation very easily. It's not a difficult thing to do. The thing that's difficult to do in a matrix is the horizontal integration. If I've got a resource pool of engineers and I've got 7 projects that need engineers and I've only got enough engineers for 6 projects or 5 projects, the next question is, well, what are we going to do? Well, we can spread it out a little, and each project will take a little longer. We can put in outside resource, get some contractors in to fill the voids. But that horizontal integration of how resources are being used across the organization on all the projects becomes a critical decision support information, so that we have the ability to say what the problems are and what's needed to resolve them. So vertical integration, horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is done poorly, if at all, in our organizations. And we don't hear about resource constraints until they happen, and then everybody bitches about it. So this lets us anticipate, and by linking it to the strategy, I can use that as my lever to get responsible people to work on my project because of the importance of the project. So creating this linkage is something that we attempt to do by using the tools of project management to create the information that allows us to have that communication. So the linkage is important, and it happens at a variety of levels. Now, the key then to this working effectively, not only do we need to know who the project stakeholders are, and in fact, PMI realized this was so important. I think it was back in the 5th edition of the PMBOK, they added a whole section on stakeholder management. They realized that the stakeholder issue is so much bigger than your project. And so when you look at that, the project ones are easy to identify, and you got the project manager, you got the individual contributors, you can identify them pretty quickly. And if you've done a good job of work breakdown structure, you can link them to actual work outputs. Okay, but what you're not doing is spending enough time looking at this stakeholder issue to create a stakeholder analysis. And so above above the project, there's some stakeholders that are pretty darn important. First of all, there's the sponsor or the champion. That may be a C-level individual, and I put them in categories. I say they're control stakeholders, they're impact stakeholders, or they're interested stakeholders. So at the upper level, the control stakeholders, these are the people that can actually stop or start your project. They have the ability to control your project. Some of them will be identified on the charter document. You know who they are, but others, let's say we've got a VP of information, a CIO, and your project is supporting the CIO, so the CIO becomes a control stakeholder. Well, you also have the legal representation. You also have quality issues. You also have, at the higher level, you have these components that have the oversight on projects to make sure that the organization is well. Those are all control stakeholders. And if you don't identify them and develop a communications plan with them, you will pay a price. I've actually had a project canceled by someone I had no idea had any interest or involvement in the project. And it came back to bite me because eventually he said, I just figured this project wasn't doing anything because I never heard about it, and canceled the darn thing. So then you've got your control, your project people, the impact people, but they're also not just active participants in the project. People like the resource pool owners. The people who actually control what you need to get your job done, they are critical impact stakeholders. If you need a subject matter expert and instead of a SME, you get a schmo, that's going to impact your project. So they're impact stakeholders. So we create a line of communications with that level, and it goes on and on. Stakeholder management. I teach a whole day class on stakeholder management, how critical it is to the success of projects. Now we also have one called interested stakeholders that can be a huge effort to identify, but what we have to understand with interested stakeholders is they can't control your project, they can't have a negative impact on your project, but they're interested in your project. They might have a project like it coming down the pike. They might have experienced things on a project like it. They want to validate that their approach is good. They're interested. They're not the doers. They're not the individual contributors. They're not the CIOs. They're just people that are interested. Now, quick story, and then I'll move on. The project we went to market with, it realized $11 billion acquisition. We had 100 chemists in this organization when I came in. I needed 25 chemists on my project, so I hand selected 25. Well, that left 75 that didn't get picked, and they weren't happy. And so I had to deal with that. I don't want to deal with sniping from outside. So I started to hold brown bag sessions every Friday, lasted about an hour and a half to 2 hours, where there's that 75 chemists got together with my 25 chemists and just chatted, no agenda, no specific outcome expected, and just talked about what they were doing, what was working, what wasn't working, and so on. Well, once we broke that up and had to get on with the project, we got it done and got it done quickly. Well, here's a fact that very few know, and I've not told this to everybody, but the fact of the matter is the chemistry that went to market and resulted in the eventual $11 billion acquisition was not developed by my project chemists. It was actually the methodology and the approach and the materials were actually developed by the non-project chemists. So that's a point where an interested stakeholder who had no standing in my project resulted in an $11 billion acquisition. So you probably won't hit on one quite that impactful, but the fact of the matter is interested stakeholders are, shall I say, interested in what you're doing and how you're doing it, okay? So remember that as we go forward, know who the stakeholders are. And learn how to communicate effectively with them, and spend just as much time managing up as you do managing down. This has gotten to be a hot topic lately, is how much time should I spend managing up? And I got to tell you, as a successful project manager, I actually spent more than half of my time managing up. And so it builds rapport, it builds trust, and that's something that we have to have in order to get these projects done with limited resources in a constrained time frame. Thankfully, PMI and all the other professionals in the world of project management have made it easy for us by coming up with tools. Here's my view. This toolbox is crammed full, and it gets more full every year. Every year, somebody's coming up with God's gift to project management. Use this tool, and every project you do will be successful. Well, that's a load of crap. What you got to understand is there are lots of tools. Don't get me wrong. When I was starting in this business in '66, I remember the tool I had. It was one that I felt good about. The tool I used was paper and pencil. That's what I used. And then we've evolved. We've evolved from the TI calculators into the mainframes, and you name it, from a processing information standpoint. But the problem was, if the information was bad, then the output was bad. So we've come up with these tools that'll help us create valid and useful information. One of those tools, of course, is the work breakdown structure. I've spent some time on that. I think it's important we do the same. It's the skeleton we hang everything on. So if I want to look at a work package 1.1.1, I can go to that work package, I can assess it, I can look at what the product process has been, I can communicate to people that might be impacted. So the work breakdown structure is the home. Here's what I say. WBS is the foundation of all things project management. So if you give me, I go into some organization and I'll say, can I get a look at your work breakdown structure? Oh, absolutely. They run forward with it. They hold it out. And guess what I've got? I've got a bar chart schedule. They think that's their work breakdown structure. So you learn real quickly what kind of work you got in front of you when you get something like that. So we got that. And then the next one that I'm going to give you three that I insist on, okay, for people working on my projects, the WBS, and then comes the precedent diagram method schedule, the critical path schedule. That again picks off the skeleton of the WBS, the work packages, puts them in sequential output input form, does some numerical values of forward pass and backward pass, and now I've created a critical path schedule. Now, by that I mean those things that are on the critical path, of course, have no float. That means they've got to be done when we say they'll be done to support the end date. It also, which I think is almost more important information, it also identifies the float paths. And this provides me the flexibility. This prevents me from having to run to the strategic objective owner every time we see a work package starting to slip. Because if it's got float and I can adjust and adapt without having to go to anybody else for information exchange purposes, I'm ahead of the game. And from a critical path standpoint, if I had, like the one we had over in Indiana, we had basically 100 work packages, and only 40 some of those were on the critical path. That means all the rest of them, 900 of them, were not critical path. That's a lot of flexibility to allow you to shift and move and jive however you need to adjust to primarily resource constraints, but any other issue that comes up. So that's number two, critical path schedule. Number three is a risk assessment exercise. Looking at the WBS, looking at the work breakdown structure, do a risk analysis, identify the risks, look at what the potential impacts are, look at the probability, all those fancy things. Some of you probably got risk management credentials, so I'm preaching to the choir. You got to have it. And then the other issue is you got to use it. Again, risk management got real hot, and the use of dashboards and all that good stuff came in, another tool that's crept in over the years. So when I asked them, do you do risk management? Oh, yes, sir. They bring forward a list. It's the risk register. They got the right name on the top and everything, risk register. And I look at it, and sure enough, there's 25 risks identified. I said, that's great. I said, now what do you do with it now? and she said, well, we don't do anything with it. We just keep track of it so we know what kind of risks we got to deal with. They don't manage risk, they identify risk. That's step one. So those three things, WBS, critical path, and risk assessment, that's your key to the executive lounge, okay? Because you now can communicate with those strategic linked organizational components with intelligence, more information than they have, that's for sure. And now you can begin to look, it creates the illusion of intelligence. And if you use it long enough, it becomes real. And you become sort of the person to go to. Now, one of the things that's changed is, you know, we used to do a lot of waterfall. If those of you in IT development, certainly if you're old like I am, you remember this, is that you do a lot of IT projects. Well, back in the good old days, we had organizations that were organized around waterfall process for getting projects done. And even now, there's still some, even with the advent of Agile and the hybrid approaches that are available, we still have a few organizations that have maintained the waterfall capability, primarily because of the concept of old dog, new tricks. If you go into one of those organizations that are still there, most of the people will be old like I am, because they've been doing this for so many years and they do it really well, and so they've kept them intact. But for the purposes of 75 or 80% of the IT development projects, we've gone to the game of rugby. Rugby is like like American football, except the people who play it don't have any equipment, don't have any pads. They get hit just as hard. They don't have any pads. But the key part of rugby is what the Agile process has adopted, and that's the scrum. So this reflects it quite well, actually. If you look at that scrum, what you realize is, like rugby, we put the scrum in the middle of the group, okay? And this is called the scrum. And then everybody goes forward. They're pushing and shoving and hitting. And I mean, it's unbelievable to watch. And until finally the requirements squirt out, and somebody grabs them and runs like crazy. That's sort of the way Agile projects are. We throw them out there in the scrum early on in the process, and we run through and we take on sprints. We go for 2 weeks is very common. Then we meet every day in a stand-up meeting to talk about, you know, what we get done yesterday, what are we going to do today, and what's going to get in the way, those 3 famous things that we do, and then we start running again. So the analogy to rugby is accurate. And it's actually quite compelling and very communicative in terms of what is this Agile really about? So it's covered in that way. And if you don't know Agile and you want to stay in the field of project management, let me suggest that you get up to speed on Agile Scrum process, because it's going to come into play almost certainly in the future. The predictive model, 50%, Agile hybrid, 50%. The exam's going to see the same reflection. And so you got to know this. If you're going to be a PMP, that says you know project management. Well, this is a component now that's become a component of project management. So you're going to have to take the responsibility of bringing your organization up to speed. There's a strategic linkage here. Why do you think the senior level management likes the idea of Agile? Well, because the claim is you get faster delivery and better delivery in terms of meeting requirements for the project using Agile than you do the waterfall and or predictive approach. Now, on big projects that have software components and hardware components, this is where you get the hybrid. You can deal with the hardware components in a waterfall or a predictive approach, while you can deal with the software in the Agile approach. So we've got to know that. We've got to be up to speed. Now, and organizations know that. The very people that are establishing the strategic objectives that you are working so hard to deliver are the same people that are not willing to invest the time and the money to establish the capability to recognize and maintain a strategic linkage. So how many times have I heard a project manager, oh no, we're going to be 6 months late. I said, wow, 6 months late. What does that do to impact the strategy of the organization? And the response, well, I don't know. We're just going to be 6 months late. If that's the answer, you aren't there yet. If somebody asks you where your project fits in the organizational strategy and you say, I have no idea, you aren't there yet. That's your job. Don't count on them telling you. They're not going to tell you. I mean, you're down at the third, fourth level, fifth level of the organization. What do you think, they're going to come down and chit chat with you about it? No, they've got things to do too. But the fact of the matter is, you need to ask. Where does it fit? Now, if you're in the third level of the WBS, then your responsibility is to ask the project manager where you fit in the objective of completing that project. Those conversations need to take place. It costs money. One of the problems we've endured is that we aren't connected. We aren't strategically and vertically and horizontally connected because our information systems don't connect very well. So now organizations are considering and taking action, frankly, on and establishing and implementing a PPM, project portfolio management process. Now, I learned this a couple of years ago, how important it is. And so I've been doing a little bit of work with a company over in Dublin, Ireland, called Chorus Systems. Now, there's a plethora of these companies out there all over the world, really. But I liked theirs. I looked at it. I liked it. I liked the way it looked. I liked what you could do with it. I've taken about 4 or 5 tutorials and different aspects of it, and I really like it. So Chorus Systems has one that has impressed me to the extent that I think people should all have, that everyone should have some form of a PPM, some capability to integrate all of this information from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization. And it will improve our decision support information substantially and add a lot of value to what we do. But you got to be careful with just like anything else. If a little's good, then people start to think, well, then a lot's better. So when you have an information system that links everything together, you need to be careful in what you draw out of it for reporting purposes. You don't want more, you want right. And so you do have that capability. The worst example, or best, depending on your point of view, I was working in Richland, Washington for the Battelle Memorial Institute, and one of my jobs in terms of implementing project management, national laboratory, had never been done before, but I also was responsible for delivering the monthly report down to the DOE headquarters office. The first report I was asked to deliver, they rolled it into my office on a hand truck, 5 feet tall. This is a monthly report, 5 feet tall. It's an old perforated computer paper. Some of you probably remember that. And my first impression was, what in the world is this? We're a $300 million a year laboratory, and we're sending a 5-foot report down. So I went down, met the guy, challenged him on the validity of the report. He said, we swear by it. We lose it. I got 12 project control officers. That's all they can think about is how to get that report and use it in managing their various departments. So I made a bet with him that if I could show they weren't using it, we'd raise the level of detail. So the first month down, it's still 5 feet because I haven't proved anything yet, but I salted it with some things that if anybody's actually reading it, I'm probably going to get a phone call. Okay, so I sent it on down. Nothing. Not a word. Not a word. Well, that's confirmation. They didn't read it. Next month, I did the same thing, except I had raised it 1 level. Now it was down to 3 feet. I salted it with some information, expecting a call as soon as I sent it down. Down it went. Nothing. Not a word. So that confirmed again. So the third time, now I'm getting tired of the game because I do have some work that I want to do. So the third time, now it's down to about 18 inches, okay? And this time I'm going to put an end to this thing. I salt it with some stuff, but this time I salt it with some things about his family. Primarily his mother and his sister. So I know if he reads it, by golly, I'll be getting a call. Well, it wasn't down there 5 minutes. My phone's ringing. We didn't have his caller ID, but I knew who it was. I said, Frank, what's up? He said, I'll tell you what's up, Lee. He said, I just got the monthly report down here, and I don't know what in the world you think you're pulling. I don't know why you think they have the authority to do the things that you're doing. But he said, you're not going to get away with it. I can tell you that right now. And I said, well, Frank, what are you saying? And he said, well, what I'm saying, Lee, he said, the report's here. I've been looking at it, and suddenly I realized, so Lee, he said, I realized, didn't that report used to be a lot thicker? He still hadn't read it. Now, when I left that organization in 1984 to come here in Columbus, Ohio, they were reporting to the Department of Energy with a 24-page report. Okay, 24-page report. So we'd gone from 5 feet to 24 pages. And all the information that was in the 5 foot was still in the system, but we wisely chose what we wanted to put on the 24 pages. So utilize this in your advantage because it gives you leverage with the objective strategy involvement. It gives you leverage with those individuals, and it gives you strength of knowledge. Okay, so you got to remember that. Now, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything I say. I mean, I have no leverage over you, but I just wanted to show you a picture of the last guy who didn't do what I said. You got to think about it. You got to think about what adds value. You got to think about what's going to enable you and or your resources, whether they're assigned to you or whether you own them in your organization. What's it going to do to improve the capability or the probability of you completing a project that contributes to the organizational strategy that's been developed well in advance of your project execution. So as you move forward, good luck with this. Remember, ask questions, ask questions. I have a rule in my organizations: ask questions till somebody asks you to stop asking questions. Now you know you're onto something. So you inform yourself, you educate yourself, and then capitalize on it by using it to establish and maintain strategic linkage. Okay, that's all the formal presentation I've got. I'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Lee. So I'm just going to go back to the chat here real fast and just add some private messages as well, so bear with me. I don't know that we have any direct questions. We do have some valuable comments. Anne Marie, thank you for your suggestions on reading. Same thing with Jessica Redmond, thank you. Yeah, I'm familiar with Lead and Out Authority. That is good. That is a good title. I'm not familiar with Beyond Measure. I'll have to check that one out. Let's see. Anne Marie, you had a comment. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that at all. Or not?
Yeah, I can't.
Okay, good enough. Yeah. Oh, you should have been unmuted, Anne Marie. I heard you.
Okay, that worked now. Sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry as well. There you go.
No, yeah. So I think I was just agreeing with the concepts around Agile. And I think we often tend to think that we're either doing projects in a traditional way or an Agile way. And I really don't think in that way. I think that all projects are, you're working to deliver them in more of a hybrid model in the reality of things. So there are some things that might need to be planned up front. And certainly there's some projects that need very fine requirements defined before you even start. But in many projects, you get your high-level scope and then you work to elaborate on those requirements and phase them according to priority or risk, etc. And those are all concepts of Agile project management that I think everybody can bring to bear on their projects. And I have a project running right now and we're in the middle of a very robust data conversion, and we've been using daily huddles, the Scrum technique, daily with a very small subsection of the team to keep momentum going and address questions in there. So I think I'm calling out that really don't think about it as traditional versus Agile, but just look at the concepts of both and really look to how you can pull in those techniques to make your project team more effective as you're trying to move forward.
You know what we should come up with is a process called do the right thing.
Yep. Sounds good.
Because if you may remember in the old PMBOK back in 96 when we issued the first PMBOK, we didn't know anything about Agile much then, but we had a concept in there called rolling wave planning. That's really the birth of Agile in terms of how we apply it. The other thing that I love what you're saying, and I've kind of fallen in love with this concept, is the daily stand-ups, because what you've done with the daily stand-up is you've implemented a closeout process on a daily basis where the retroactive gives you immediate feedback on your performance and how you can adjust for the future. I love the daily stand-up sessions.
Yep.
Great thoughts. Thank you. Anybody else on that same line of thinking, or perhaps any other? And I've tried to mute everybody. You should be able to unmute yourselves. If you're having trouble, just drop something in the chat and I'll do my best to assist. Not a quiet group. Either that or they're muted. Again, if you're having trouble, let me know. Okay, JJ. Thank you. JJ's leaving the group here. Okay, well, unless anybody's have any other questions, I think maybe we can start to wrap it up here. If you would all unmute your microphones for just a moment, please. So we can hear everybody. Is that working? Are you guys able
Yeah,
to?
I can hear you. I think, can you hear us now?
I hear you, Anne Marie, but everybody else is still muted. I'm asking folks to unmute their mics.
Now we're on.
Yep.
There's like this delay, or if we mute
Oh.
ourselves, we can't unmute again, or something.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a Zoom thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't know. From my dashboard, it's like everybody's unmuted and it has been for the whole time.
Yeah.
But host will not allow. That's really weird. I don't know why.
Yeah, I got the same error that Scott got, and then it started working for me.
Very helpful. I'm hitting each of you and just trying to hit unmute. Seems like a very laborious thing just for a simple.
There we go.
Yep.
Anyway, I just wanted to give you a round of applause, Lee, and thank you very much for presenting to us today.
Thank
Really-
you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You know, the only thing I can assume is that you've got a group of attendees that are absolutely brilliant. Because when I did this in Singapore yesterday, there was 87 questions.
Wow.
So obviously you guys are way smarter than those people in Singapore.
Well, I think
I did have a question, Lee.
Okay.
Out of the 11 billion that company got for selling, how much went to those guys that worked for 18 months straight?
You know, it's hard to get away with that story without somebody asking that. I'll give you a quick history. The guy that was running it was a former DuPont turnaround specialist, about 6'8", about 380 pounds, hated people. All he cared about was money. So he asked me, he said, I'm gonna establish a bonus pool that people will be able to tap into if they get this project done on time. He said, what do you think about that? And I said, I think it's the stupidest idea you ever had. I said, but I'll take it to the team to see, because I have some strong feelings about that. I'll take it to the team and see. Team turned it down. Out of 205 people, I think 17 people voted for the bonus pool. And so I was going to go back and tell him. Now everybody knew he's going to be very angry. But they said, but you can tell him this, Lee. Tell him that if he wants to reward us spontaneously, in other words, don't hold that carrot out in front of us, but if we are able to do what we want to do, reward us spontaneously, we won't have any trouble with that. So I explained that to him. He was totally angry. It was the pool was $2 million, by the way. And so he was not happy, but I talked, I've got to do what the team wants to do. And he said, okay. So, well, we got it done. Obviously, I told you that. And so he came into the meeting room about a week after we'd finished the project. We were all kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. and he came in and he said, I just wanted to let you know that each one of you and your significant other will spend 2 weeks in Hawaii on me. And nobody turned that down. Nobody got upset about that at all. And I said, oh, that's going to be awesome. I can't wait. He said, you're not going. I said, what do you mean I'm not going? He said, you're a contractor. You got paid to do your job. That's the way it was. So I went ahead and paid my own way and went just to make him angry. So the team was, one of my strengths is developing high performance teams. And I got to do all my magic on that team. And it's been written up by the PEMNet magazine as a miracle project. I mean, it's one of those where you go to bed at night thinking about, oh God, I wish all my projects were like that.
Great story. Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome.
All right. Okay, well, we can add another couple of anecdotes, or we can wrap it up here. We are after the hour, and we were scheduled for an hour, and then give ourselves another 15, 30 minutes or so as we do. But just to wrap things up, as far as PMI Champlain Valley is concerned, again, we've got elections coming up in the fall. We are looking for new board members. New blood on the board would be fantastic. So let me know, president@pmicv.org. Reach out to me during the various other methods, LinkedIn, what have you. Happy to hear from you. Or if you have suggestions about programming or content coming up for the fall, please feel free to share, even if it's just a quick message. Shoot us an email. We'd love to hear from you. Does anybody else have any other closing thoughts? All right. Lee, thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
I'll shoot a recording out to all of you, including yourself, Lee, so you can have it for your record. And we look forward to seeing you all hopefully soon virtually and eventually in person.
Yes.
As conditions allow. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.